My grandfather and Carbine Williams were good friends and grew up together. And Granddaddy would tell me all kinds of stories about Carbine Williams and his family when he was a young boy. And about half of them I believe, half of them I didn't. But I knew that he knew Carbine because when I was a boy, he would take me over to his shop over on 301 between Godwin and Wade, and I would play with his German Shepherd white dog while he went in and talked to Carbine. And years later, I was a grown man, had children, and I was in the Napa store up in Dunn, which Ronnie Q ran. And this man came in. I was standing there waiting for Teddy Miller. And this man came in, stood there beside her. He said, "You waiting?" I said, "Yeah, I'm waiting for Teddy." And he said, "Do I know you?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I'm Ronald Ennis." And he said, "I'm Gordon Williams." And I said, "Gordon Williams?" He said, "Yes, sir." And of course, he was probably about my age now at that time. I was a young man. And I said, "You wouldn't happen to be Carbine Williams' brother, would you?" He said, "Yes, sir, I am." And I said, "Boy, I've heard some tales about Carbine." And he said, "Who in the world by?" I said, "My grandfather." And he said, "Well, who was your grandfather?" I said, "Well, his name was William Henderson Lambert, but everybody knew him as Bill Henry." And he said, "Oh, my Lord, Bill Henry Lambert?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Man, I could tell you stories about that man that you wouldn't believe." And I said, "You knew my grandfather?" And he said, "I certainly did." Well, then all those memories started coming back. And he said, he was with us the night that Carbine got caught for shooting that revenue. And I said, "No, he won't." And he said, "Yes, he was." And I said, "Well, that's a story he didn't ever tell me." And he said, "Well, he didn't want to be a part of it at the time." So old people do have stories, and most of them are true. I'm not saying all of them are, but most of them are. But the story I'm going to tell today is something he related to me. He said his grandfather, Aaron Lockamy, told him. Aaron Lockamy lived over on a plot of land on South River, at the mouth of South River, where Black Mingo, and Black River joins and forms South River. And he told me that his grandfather told him during the Civil War that Sherman had come into Fayetteville and he was burning the city down. And everybody, of course, over in this neighborhood was hearing about it from friends and relatives and stuff that came through. And part of Sherman's troops came down what is now Highway 13. When I was a boy, it was US 102. Nobody remembers that now because everybody's dead and gone that was around when Highway 13 name was changed. But the troops was coming down what is now Highway 13, and they got to South River, which is at that time was called Graham's Bridge. The rebel troops had a skirmish with them on the other side. Most of the Confederates was cavalry, and they had a skirmish on the other side of the river in Cumberland County. And of course, Granddaddy didn't know the dates and stuff that I know now because I was looking back up to it. The skirmish was held on March the 15th, 1865. Don't know the Confederate troops really that was involved in it, but I do know by looking up in history and reading reports and stuff that the Indiana 52nd was involved in it. The Indiana 62nd was involved in it. The Illinois 52 was involved in it, and the Iowa 24 and Iowa 2nd and 7th Infantry, all of them was infantry, was involved in it. In fact, the Confederacy burnt the bridge, Graham's Bridge, down, and they couldn't cross. So they camped on the other side of the bridge in Cumberland County on the 15th. At the same time, Sherman's troops was also going up, the left wing was going up towards Averysboro at the same time. As they were camping at Graham's Bridge, they were also camping on the south end of where the battle took place at Averysboro the same day. My grandfather told me that Aaron Lockamy decided that he would get his livestock and everything away from the house so that the scavengers wouldn't take it. And that's what the scavengers were doing, was going ahead of the troops, and they were getting everything they could get. They were getting cows, hogs, chickens, robbing the smokehouses.
Who were the scavengers with?
They were with Sherman's troops. They were collecting food for his troops. And he heard that they were on the other side of Graham's Bridge, and they could hear the cannon fire and the bullets, the guns being fired the day before when they were having the battle. So he got up and got all of his livestock, and he drove them down to a place called Beach Island. For the ones that's familiar, it's down below where Glenn McClam stays today, off on Highway Green Path Road. It runs out of Falcon. That was also called the Smithfield Road at one time. And he drove it down to Beach Island. Beach Island was an island on Black Mingo that was surrounded by water. And all it had was beech trees. That's why it was called Beach Island. And he drove his livestock and took them all down there. He left a couple of pigs at the house. He left a few chickens, but he took all his meat and everything that hung in the smokehouse, and he also took them down.
Did he leave some to fool the scavengers so they felt like they got everything he had?
Right.
Good guy.
So weeks before the scavengers came through, his wife, Edna, she was a Godwin. She had quilted a quilt, and she took the family Bible and wrapped it up in that quilt and put it in a burnt-out stump hole that was behind the house and covered it up with leaves and hid it. That quilt was handed down to Martha Jane. She's a ranch now, but she was a Tew. It was handed down through her family. Her grandmother and my grandfather was half brothers and sisters. She was Joanna Lambert, and she ended up with the Bible and the quilt after her mother passed away. Well, her stepmother passed away. So that quilt and that Bible now is in the Averysboro Museum over at Averysboro, and it has a story that I'm telling typed up on it. Some of the things that I remembered, and David Earl Wise ended up with the quilt and the Bible, and we talked him in. In fact, Wayne Wrench and I was on the board of directors for Averysboro for a number of years, and we talked him in, along with others, to donating it to the Averysboro Museum, and it now is located there, which is a memory of our ancestors. But the scavengers came through, and of course he didn't have but a couple of chickens around the house, and he only had a pig or two. He had maybe a ham in the smokehouse, and that was it. There wasn't a whole lot left. And so they started questioning him where his livestock was at. And of course he wouldn't tell them nothing. And they started beating him. He was going to beat the truth out of him. Well, they weren't as harsh on him as he had the will to not tell them. So they beat him almost to death. In fact, they left him for dead. And they went on after a while and went to other neighbors' house and started raiding their farms. And of course, they nursed him back to health. I think his neighbors finally went down and got his livestock off of Beach Island and returned him to his home. He lived to be a ripe old man. He was born in 1829. He lived to be almost 100 years old. Just to give you some background on him, his father helped start Shiloh Pentecostal Holiness Church over here on Altar Mill Road. His grandfather helped start Baptist Chapel. In fact, I believe he was the first clerk, am I right, Wayne, at Baptist Chapel. So he had a good background. And in 1895, his family helped organize Corinth's Free Will Baptist Church, which I go to now and have been all my life, with the exception of a few years. But have a good background in Christianity, God-fearing people. But not only do I try to tell my grandchildren stories, as my granddaughter tells, but I try to tell them stories that my grandfather told me. In fact, I'm trying to, in my ripe old age of 76, I'm trying to write a book now. It's going to be called Memories of Old Men. And so I'm trying to put some of those stories to work. So hopefully this will be something that somebody can relate to, not only on this podcast, but on podcasts in the future. Maybe later on we can do some more of my stories. And
on a side note, I grew up 1 mile from everything you're telling me about.
Hey, my world.
I had no idea in this world that was Graham's Bridge.
Graham's Bridge.
Had no idea there was any battles there, any of these stories. I have plundered all through the woods my whole life. Never knew what I was plundering on top of.
Plundered all over
a
small battleground. Wasn't a large battleground, but it was going on at the same time as the battle at Aversboro was going on.
And the reason being is because it was the only way they could cross South River was at that
bridge. That bridge. Now, some of the troops that broke off and came down what I've always known as JB's store, Barefoot's Road, I believe it's called now. Some of the troops broke off and did the same thing over there. I believe that's called Barefoot's, so always been called Barefoot's Landing. Some of the troops came down that road, and the same thing happened. The Confederacy burned every bridge in front of them, so they made it hard. Mm-hmm. And what they would do, they would tear down the houses and the buildings that was around the bridges, and they would build the floor of the bridge back so that they could get across. But you got to keep in mind, I don't know how many wagons was with them when they come through here. I don't know that part. But I do know that there was approximately 400 wagons crossed a Batoon Bridge over the Cape Fear River when he crossed Cape Fear coming into Sampson County out of Fayetteville, after he burnt Fayetteville. And I have read that there was something like 11,000 refugees with him. And they were having to feed all them. That's why the scavengers was out.
So they weren't just feeding Sherman's boys, they were feeding everybody
that was with them. Now, as far as I know, none of the refugees came through here, because most of them left Fayetteville and went right straight down to Wilmington.
Now, explain to everybody watching this, what is a refugee in this situation?
That was a former slave that had been, that had took up with the Army as they were exiting Georgia and South Carolina. And
they wanted their freedom.
They wanted their freedom. And they felt like if they stayed with the northern invaders, that they would be able to get away from the South and get away from slavery. Now, at the same time I'm talking about slavery, all black people were not slaves. Just like all white people weren't free. They were white slaves too. My grandfather grew up as a slave. It was just called a different thing. It was called a sharecropper. He was a sharecropper all his life till he got grown, with the exception of when he was a boy. Now, he had to go to work when he was 7 years old. His father passed away. He went to work at the lumber mill. That's how he learned how to read and write and add and subtract. He was kind of self-taught.
Where was the lumber mill at?
It was somewhere over there around my Aaron Lockham's place on the river. I wish I'd have brought it. I have a photograph of Aaron Lockham's turpentine distillery. Do you know anything about turpentine?
Yes, I have watched many documentaries on it.
I have a picture that was taken of my great-grandfather, Aaron Lockham's turpentine distillery. There's a number of men inside the picture that I have identified. My grandfather's grandfather I have identified. I've also identified Daniel Strickland, who came across from Cumberland County over in the Flea Ridge community.
Would that be something about Eastover because that?
Well, that was the city before Eastover.
Okay.
That was a big. Well, it wasn't big. There was nothing big back then as far as towns was concerned.
It was as big as it got for us.
But it was as big as it was around at the time. Flea Ridge was a pretty good sized community over there at one time. And he was from over in that area. And he came across into Sampson County, and he came as a cooper. He collected turpentine off of trees. That's how John Lambert, who was my granddaddy's father, that's how he got here. I found him in 1850 up in Johnson County, up in around Elevation area. And he's working for some guy up there he's a cooper, a turpentine collector.
Right. They would scrape the tree, or you would cut the tree a certain way with a V in it, and you would hit slats inside it, and then they would run down and get into a collection tub. You'd take a cart around like a horse-drawn carriage with a tub in the back of it and constantly pour one container into the other until then eventually you would bundle it up into a big metal or wood.
And then you would take it to the distillery. He came down from Johnson County to the Flea Ridge community. Some reason he came across and got a job with Aaron Lockamy. And when he came over here, he came over with a wife and 3 daughters. And Joanna Lambert was one of those daughters. Alice Lambert was another one. The other one was named Martha. And he came across with a wife and 3 daughters. Well, he got a job with Aaron Lockamy, and soon after that, his wife passed away. He needed a wife. Aaron Lockamy had a daughter named Amanda B. That's B-E-E. Amanda was a young girl. Like so many other young girls, she liked to play around. So she got up with John Lambert, and they had a couple of children. All married, but had a couple of children. In fact, they ended up having 3 children before they ever got married. And then they had 2 more. But they all went with Lamberts. He died, like I said, when my grandfather was 7 years old. So that would have been, he was born 88. That would have been in 1895. And she raised all 5 of those children. Now, 3 of those children died when the plague come through, and she lost them. But they were up pretty good size. I think that was in 1914 when that plague come through and got 3 of her children.
What was the plague? Was it like yellow fever or something?
Black plague, they called it.
Okay. Oh, Spanish flu. Spanish
flu, that's right. It come through in 1910 and 1914, I think. I think it was 2 different times it came through. But it got the majority of her children. But the other one she raised, well, my grandfather, like I said, when his father died, he had to become the man of the house. So he had to get him a job, so he didn't get no education. And so like I said, he went to work.